Oh, thank you. This is great. And didn't Lona do a wonderful job? I'm so excited she's back here at Rutgers with me. Oh, hi, Ruth.
Hi, Hillary.
How are you?
I'm used to the Eagleton drawing room.
Yes, yes. It's a little bigger.
A little bigger. Wow. Thank you, Lona, for everything. She has been so helpful, so wonderful for so long in the work that we have done, and especially in arranging this event. Wow, and welcome on behalf of the Eagleton Institute of Politics. We're thrilled to host Secretary Clinton. I'm going to call her Hillary from now on, but as our 2017-2018 Clifford P. Case Professor of Public Affairs. And before I begin, I want to extend sincere thanks to Senator Case's family. I see joining us for today and always supporting us in this work. That is his daughter.
Yes.
And also, of course, you've met Chancellor Dutta as well. We want to thank the Division of Student Affairs, the Division of Undergraduate Academic Affairs, and Rutgers Athletics for coming together. Everyone came together to make this day possible. Our team could not have done this without your team. And speaking of our team, I want, before we begin, to make a special shout-out and thanks to Eagleton's Randy Chmielewski and Danielle Cohen, who have worked tirelessly to make today's event possible. So this event has been billed as a conversation, which suggests something small and intimate. But that was before our community's eagerness to see you compelled us to shift to a basketball court, and one faculty member I might have mentioned to you wrote and suggested we go to the stadium. We stopped short of that, but on behalf of all of us, thank you for being here, for saying yes, and welcome back to Rutgers.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm going to ask some questions, and we've asked for questions from the public, and I'll intersperse several of those as we go along. So let's begin. As strange as it may sound, and certainly to some of you here, you are the most well-known person people don't know. Some people know one or more of your titles. Lona mentioned them. An extraordinary series of roles and service to this country. And yet, with all that, people often say they don't really know who you are as a person. Sometimes I say I don't really know what that means, but we hear it. Nonetheless, clearly you are hugely admired and popular. So a case in point is this crowd today. And the people on our waiting list who will never forgive us. A more lasting sign is that you have topped Gallup's list of most admired women in the world 22 times. And for those of you who might not know this, this is almost twice as many times as the amazing woman you often mention atop of your most admired list, Eleanor Roosevelt. And yet you're also widely caricatured and attacked, as was she. A student at Rutgers School of Biological and Health Sciences asked a question similar to one of mine. What are the biggest misconceptions people have about you? I'd add, what do you wish people knew or understood better about you?
Well, first, Ruth, let me say how pleased and honored I am to be here, and especially to participate in the Clifford P. Case Professor of Public Affairs. I admired Senator Case from afar. I'm delighted members of his family are here today. I kind of yearn for those years when Republicans and Democrats worked together on behalf of the common good of our country. And I'm delighted to be here with Ruth, whom I've known for a very long time, and I admire greatly also the work of the Eagleton Institute and the Center for Women and Politics. So today, I have no idea what Ruth is going to ask me. She has no idea what I'm going to answer. And it may be fitting, we're in a basketball court, because we'll throw the ball back and forth to try to make it interesting for you over the next hour and a half. The question that Ruth just posed is obviously one I've given some thought to, because I hear it myself. I hear what Ruth was alluding to, like well-known but not well-known, or known but not understood. And I take that to heart, because I've been in the national public eye now for 25 years, ever since 1992. But I have often thought that I am a kind of Rorschach test for people who are trying to make sense, not just of me personally, but of women's roles and women's expanded opportunities in not only America, but around the world, so that I'm seen not just as an individual, as Lona, who I just adore and has literally done my schedule, as she said, for all these days, knows. I'm very grateful for my friendships and my colleagues, and I spend a lot of time nurturing those. I feel like I've got a tremendous circle of people who do know me and do understand and do support me, and I'm very grateful for all of that. But when you're in the public eye, you get snippets of a person, and I think it's gotten even more difficult not to have a fragmentary view of anybody in the public arena today. So I probably can't answer it fully. I think people are very curious, and in part the curiosity is because of my coming onto the stage in a way as the first woman of my generation to be in the White House as a First Lady, having worked as a lawyer, as an advocate prior to my husband ever being elected president. So that raised questions, and I think people drew all kinds of assumptions or caricatures from that. I did, as you might recall, play a very active and public role in trying to bring about universal health care reform so that everybody would have access to quality, affordable health care. And I don't think I can overstate how controversial that was. And so there I was, doing what I thought was an important mission that my husband and his team had asked me to do. And every day I was just, in the vortex of political struggle. And so I think that I myself personally and the role of women in our society, we kind of converged, one might even say collided, at a point in history. And I think it is still to some extent going on. So I can only hope that people understand and maybe know more about me, because there's a through line to my life, my commitment to my own family, to children and families, to women's rights and opportunities, to trying to make us a more perfect union. I really believe all of that because I was given a great support in my own life by my own family and a great public school education and everything that has made me who I am. So I would hope that people would spend a little bit of time, actually looking behind the image or the picture. And, you know, that is, I think, what we hope for all of us. We want to be known as who we are and judged positively or negatively based on what we actually do, not what people say we did. So I think that's my best answer.
And the image and picture are so complicated. Most admired woman in the world, more than any other woman. And at the same time, and right now, people saying, get off the public stage and shut up, which is something we're hearing all the time.
Yeah.
How do you...
Well, that began to happen after the election.
Yeah.
And, you know, the election was pretty traumatic. So, you know, I think there were a lot of people who were like, oh, my gosh, I don't want to have to think about it. I don't want to have to hear about it. And totally, that's how I felt. I took a lot of long walks in the woods, you know, drank my share of Chardonnay. I did what I could to deal with it. But then I did decide that I had to figure out what happened because I was confused about it, and ended up, you know, writing a book called that. And I was really struck by how people said that to me. You know, mostly people in the press, for whatever reason, like, oh, you know, go away, go away. And I had one of the young people who works for me go back and do a bit of research. They never said that to any man who was not elected. And I was kind of struck by that, and I'm really glad that, you know, Al Gore didn't stop talking about climate change, and I'm really glad that John Kerry went to the Senate and became an excellent Secretary of State, and I'm really glad John McCain kept speaking out and standing up and saying what he had to say. And for heaven's sakes, Mitt Romney is running for the Senate. So I think, you know, look, I think it was the moment in time because of what had been expected to happen in the election, which obviously did not. And then a lot of angst and second guessing and finger pointing and everything that went on. But I am really committed to speaking out and doing what I can to have a voice in the debate about where our country's going, because maybe we'll get to it. You won't be surprised to hear me say that I have some concerns. And I think we need to, you know, we need to all be talking about it, not just me, but every one of us needs to be speaking up and taking part.
So when we established the Center for American Women and Politics in 1971, part of this whole era that we've been involved with, people told us there was no such subject as women in politics, certainly nothing to study, and we were establishing it at a university. Almost 50 years later, we're very proud that this center is the nation's really premier resource on all things women in politics. And we always point to you as a model of women's political leadership. You recently wrote, "The most important work of my life has been to support and empower women. I'm proud that it's the work I'm most associated with, and it remains what I'm most dedicated to." Debbie Walsh-Kopp's director for almost 20 years has been saying that this work to change the face of political power is a marathon, not a sprint. Right now we're experiencing an unprecedented moment of political engagement on the part of women. How do we sustain that? And how do we sustain the institutions that are supporting that engagement, partisan, nonpartisan, academic, activist? How do we keep from regressing in the face of backlash?
Oh, I think, you know, I'm so encouraged and actually optimistic about the number of women, particularly young women, who are running for office, who are being active in politics, even if they themselves are not the candidates. I've been supporting groups that are recruiting women to become candidates, training them, as you have done at the center over so many years. So I think there are really three interrelated challenges. The first, which I really believe we are on the brink of crossing over, is to convince women to get involved in politics.
Right.
And
Right.
despite how difficult it is, going in with your eyes wide open that you will be criticized, you will unfortunately face all kinds of attacks, online, offline, in the real world, so-called. But it's worth it. It's worth it to go out there, to advocate for what you believe, to be the person trying to make the change you want to see. And the numbers of women who are running in these midterm elections and in the special elections that we've seen over the past year and 3 or 4 months is very encouraging to me. So we've got to keep those numbers. We have to keep the pipeline full. It's not one and out. It's one after another. Keep getting more women to run. Keep convincing young women to be part of it. And also encouraging women to work in politics. Not everybody wants to be the candidate. It's not for everybody. And yet, you saw Alona up here. Probably the most important person to any candidate is her scheduler, because you have a precious commodity known as your time and your energy, and you have to trust totally the person who's making the decisions, and they're logistical and political, and you really have to put your whole faith in that person. So it's a very complicated job that requires all the skills that she learned here at Rutgers. So there are roles for people who never want to be a candidate, as I hope many of you will consider. The second thing, though, is yes, there is something of a backlash. I understand that. And it's not only in our country, it's in other places around the world. Because when you make enough progress, when you change enough laws or regulations or norms or challenge, preconceived notions about women and what they can do or should do, there will always be discomfort. And there will always be people who will want to pull that progress back. And you have to understand that's part of breaking through glass ceilings and moving forward and bringing others with you. So you cannot allow yourself to get discouraged about that, because it's going to happen. And finally, if you're new to politics, new to being involved in making change, it is easy to get discouraged because it takes so long and there are so many setbacks. And if you go into politics or public policy changes believing so strongly in what you want to see happen, you're advocating for, you name the issue that you care about, for equal pay or paid sick days or paid leave, which, by the way, are being considered in the state government right now here in New Jersey. And if you care about those issues, you can call your representatives and your senators and the governor's office, and you get into it and you think, well, who's against these things? Right? Or you're advocating for climate change, or you're advocating on behalf of those brave young students from Parkland for common sense gun safety measures. And you find out that there are a lot of people who don't want that to happen. And they are as determined, if not more so, than you are. Because they have other interests. They see the world differently. They make money from it. They have ideological reasons for it. The biggest challenge we face is keeping up our momentum, of sustaining the energy that I have now seen across our country. And we saw first of all in the march the day after the inauguration, and now we've seen it on the March for Life. And recognizing that that's so important, and to bring people with you and to share that energy and to build those coalitions. But it will all come to naught if you don't show up and vote. So at the end of it, everyone who cares about any of these issues has to turn yourself into a get out the vote person, to get everybody you know, especially young people for whom these decisions will have decades of impact, to show up and vote, because we can have all the rallies and all the marches and all the other events that are possibly imaginable, but if we don't change the people making decisions, we're going to be discouraged, and we can't let that happen.
So I want to go back to that in a minute, but first I want to ask something that a student in the School of Arts and Sciences sent. She writes, which is related to this issue broadly, after the disappointing 2016 election, many young women took to participating politically in droves, but for people of color like me, nothing has changed. She continues, how do you see the predominantly white political landscape changing within the coming years, and how do we provide the resources to people of color to become equal participants in the process?
Well, because that's one of the most important questions we have to ask and answer for ourselves, I started an organization called Onward Together. Won't surprise you to hear that I believe in that. And I am funding about a dozen groups that are young people. Some of them had an organization before the election. Some of them started literally the day after the election. And they are recruiting candidates, and in particular, candidates of color. They are recruiting women, and in particular, women of color. They are organizing to train people to be candidates, particularly people of color, to get the same access to resources that anybody should be able to get if you want to run as a candidate for local, state, or national office, to really be a resource to encourage and recruit and train and help support people from all walks of life, but with a special emphasis on people of color. Now, it does come down, though, as we were just talking about, who's willing to run and who's willing to put yourself out there. And we need to have more encouragement and support and recruitment of candidates who represent every community in our country. And in some states, those are much more diverse communities than in other states. But what I've been encouraged by in the last year is to see a lot of people running for the first time. So, you know, an African American running for Congress in a district that has historically been Republican, but that's not going to stop her. A Native American running for the first time in a state that is, you know, dyed red, but they're still going to get out there and make the case on behalf of the people that they want to represent. It does take courage. I'm not going to undersell what it takes internally, the confidence and the courage to step up there, particularly if you're a person of color, particularly if you're young. But I think you will find, at least I hope, and I'm doing everything I can through my organization, you will find more support than you might have a year, 5 or 7 years ago. And we've got to keep that going. We've got to make sure that our party structures at the local, state, and national level are really welcoming and supportive of people who historically have felt marginalized or left out. You know, we are at a really important turning point in America. And I believe that our diversity, our vitality, the dynamism of our young people has got to be supported and lifted up, because that is what will get us through the period we are in now and push us better and stronger into the future.
Swinging around again to the question of women, in the campaign, and early in the campaign, you said, and I'm quoting you, "I'm not asking you to vote for me because I'm a woman. I'm asking you to vote for me on the merits." But then you added that one of those merits was that you're a woman.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about the merit of being a woman, and both as a candidate and as an office holder?
Well, I really believe, and based on my experience, I've seen it up close, that being a woman in a political campaign or being a woman office holder, based on our experience as a daughter, a wife, a mother, a grandmother, gives us a different life perspective. And that's something that we should own and be proud of, because every person who runs for office brings his or her own life experiences to the campaign and to the voters. And I tried to say in the campaign that, as Ruth just quoted, I knew I was running as a woman. I couldn't have run as anything else, very honestly. So I knew I was running as a woman, but I wanted people to know that and embrace that, but also to look at what I would bring to the office were I elected. And in my 8 years in the Senate, I worked closely with the women of the Senate, Democrats and Republicans. We had a dinner every month. We shared concerns, some of them policy issues and what to do about a problem, some of them campaign questions, some of them like, what do you do with your purse when you're at an event and there's nowhere to put it? So we really let our hair down, and we just talked about what it was like being a woman in the Senate in those years. And it was very revealing, because even though we might have had different partisan labels attached to us, in a number of areas we found common cause. And it was a real reminder to me that there may be different ways of getting something done, but if you could start by a shared perspective about what a problem is, and then help bring people to an awareness that there's something we can do, you can then debate the details. Because obviously, if you're a Democrat from New York, like I was, or a Republican from Alaska, like Lisa Murkowski is, you might have a different idea about how to do something, or whether it's important to do. But having those conversations, it was almost unique, and that was a better time than what we're seeing now. You know, people don't even talk to each other anymore. They don't socialize with each other. They're gone. They're not even in Washington, other than maybe Tuesday, Wednesday, and up until Thursday afternoon when they're back in their states or districts. It's really hard to cooperate with somebody if you don't even see them as a person. You just see like a walking R or a walking D, and we've lost a lot because of that. So I'm hoping that we each bring something to the debate, but we can't have the kind of problem solving I think we should have if we don't listen to each other. And if we walk into a room already believing you have nothing to learn from someone because you know they're a Republican, you know they're a Democrat, we are in a world of hurt. You know, I worked with practically every Republican that I served with. I worked on common cause, on issues that we had an interest in, and I sought help on matters that were particular to my state. And I will tell you, after 9/11, when New York was attacked, if I had not had the support of a Republican president and Republican leaders in the House and the Senate, we would have never gotten the help we needed to rebuild New York, and we would never have eventually gotten all the help we needed to take care of first responders and others who were sickened by what happened on that day.
I should actually know this, but are the women in the Senate still meeting?
I believe they are.
Dinners? Are they still having dinners?
I believe they are. I don't know if it's as regular as it was with us, but I believe they still are.
So they're able, even in this atmosphere, to...
Yes. Yeah. And on a couple of issues, it really, it was important to have bipartisan support, and it would grow out of those personal conversations around the dinner table.
Right, and there was an understanding in those days, at least, right, about there were certain issues we're just not going to talk about because we know we can't get to
And it was all off the record. So, I mean, you wouldn't leave the dinner and say, oh, I've convinced, Susan Collins to do this, or leave the dinner and say, oh, well, I can't convince her to do. It was all off the record because, look, at the heart of everything are relationships. Relationships, your closest friends and family, your colleagues, your neighbors, and then out from there. And if you don't build those relationships, I told a group earlier over at Eagleton that when I was elected in 2000 from New York, the then Republican leader, Trent Lott, was quoted as saying, well, maybe lightning will strike before she can get here. I got there, and by the end of, my 8 years there, he was quoted as saying, oh, she is so great to work with. She helped us on Katrina and getting the response that we needed. Because to him, before I actually showed up and talked to him and met with him and worked with him, I was a caricature. And I know what that felt like. I had a lot of work to do because, again, going back to Ruth's first question, the misimpressions, the inaccuracies, whatever you want to say about them, gave people a view of me that was totally at variance with reality, but it was the view that they were getting. I was there for a couple of weeks, and it was before I had my permanent office in the Senate. And so all of us who were new were in the basement of one of the big buildings. And we were all camped out there, starting our work, and a Republican senator came to see me. He said he wanted to meet with me. And so I brought him into the little cubbyhole of an office that I had. And he said, I'm here to apologize to you. I said, for what? He said, for everything that I said about you and thought about you. I mean, it was a kind of a poignant moment, but a little disconcerting. And I said, well, I'm sure I should apologize to you for thinking the same things. But that would have never happened if we hadn't been about to become colleagues. And now I look at the Senate and it just seems even more divided than we were back in those days. So much more partisanship as opposed to cooperation. So I am hoping that people will demand that members of Congress actually work with each other and don't play games and don't stop debates and don't take all or nothing positions. And maybe we can get back to actually working together, which would be my hope.
Sort of like they've caught a virus or something, because some of the people there now were there when you were there,
That's
right? And are they not talking to each other now, but they used to?
I think that they may be talking, but it's only pleasantries because they're being watched. both parties have their faults. I will premise what I'm about to say. And we can all do better. And I can certainly do better. I mean, obviously, in the heat of battle and political back and forth, I've said things that, I would like to take back. We all are like that. But I do worry that what's happened to the Republican Party is that it's being held captive by a very small group of powerful forces. We have seen the power of the NRA, for example, and some of the very wealthy patrons of the Republican Party are so demanding. If you deviate from their stated requests, they will fund somebody to run against you in a Republican primary. They will dry up your money. They will make it really difficult. Now, I would still like to see some Republicans stand up and say, go ahead and try it, and defend themselves. But I understand how intense the partisanship is within the Republican Party, so that you worry about somebody on your far right coming in to try to defeat you in the primary, and you end up kind of going along and wondering what you can do in the future. And the only way to remedy that is to make it very clear we are just not going to accept that kind of politics. I was the first person to run for president who had to deal with both Citizens United and the gutting of the Voting Rights Act. So with Citizens United, it was all bets are off, more money than we've ever seen, and being spent in ways we still to this day don't know. I mean, the NRA spent more money against me than they've ever spent against anybody. And all these other groups were just pumping it out, because with the Citizens United decision, we can't stop it, and we can't even follow it, and we often don't even know after the fact. And then the Voting Rights Act, which was gutted, opened the door to voter suppression like we haven't seen in 50 years. And so people are being turned away from the polls because they don't have the exact right ID, although they bring everything else they possibly can bring. And they're being purged from voting rolls because maybe they haven't voted in a year or two. And now, if things don't look like they'll go your way, you've got a governor in Wisconsin trying to stop elections. So the problems are deep. And they are ones that if we don't address, regardless of party, that's why I'm so missing John McCain's voice right now, because you can disagree with John, but he will stand up for democratic values and democratic institutions. And other Republicans who have spoken out are retiring. They're leaving right here in New Jersey and in Pennsylvania and in states across America. They're leaving because they know they will be shown no understanding by the hard right and the money that funds it. So politics is always messy, and, go to Eagleton and study political history and you'll see that for yourself. But it's different now because we have rigged it. We've rigged the game. We have rigged the money, opening the door to unaccountable money, giving corporations the right to influence elections, having the facade of charitable groups influencing elections. The role the Russians played, the role of all of this should make every American, regardless of party preference, say, wait a minute, let's get back to as level a playing field as we can. And let's be sure that we know what is being said and paid for in our own elections.
I have to do this for my freshman seminar, so I'm teaching this seminar, freshman seminar called "A Woman for President?" ? And the other day, I just want your reaction to this for the record. The other day, I said before you were coming here, they knew you were coming here, and I said, so how long do you think it will be before we have a woman president? And I found their answer a tad depressing. They said 20 years. What do you think?
I hope.
What do you think?
Okay, so let's talk about this.
I used to say I needed it to be before I got too old to dance at someone's inauguration. Right.
In my book, What Happened, I wrote a whole chapter titled On Being a Woman in Politics. And I did it because, having gone through the campaign, having not only experienced it firsthand, but a lot of anecdotal stories and then a lot of research that was done before, during, and after the campaign, it became clear that there's a barrier to envisioning a woman as our president. And I really thought we would knock that barrier down and break that glass ceiling, but I realized that it's going to take some work. I hope it doesn't take 20 years. But bringing it out into the open to discuss may very well help us begin to clear the way. So you've all heard people say, well, I'd vote for a woman, just not that woman. And since I'm often that woman, right. I do hear that. Right. And so immediately after the election, I watched as potential women candidates, none of them have said they would be interested in doing this, but potential women candidates began to get hammered. So you all remember when Elizabeth Warren was on the floor of the Senate reading the letter from Coretta Scott King, right? And it was a very critical letter of Jeff Sessions. And so Mitch McConnell basically told her to desist, to stop talking. I happened to be watching it, and I saw Elizabeth's face. I mean, again, I was in the Senate for 8 years. I don't ever remember this happening. I watched Elizabeth's face, and I saw her, sort of gather herself and then start to talk again. And McConnell basically said she was told to desist. Nevertheless, she persisted and ordered. Well, but wait. But ordered her off the floor. And the presiding officer in the Senate ordered her off the floor. And I was watching this in total, absolute bewilderment. I watched her leave, and she sort of hung in the doorway watching. And then one of our good colleagues, the senator from Oregon, Jeff Merkley, he came to the podium of his desk, and he read the Coretta Scott King letter, and nobody said a word. Okay? Next thing I saw was Kamala Harris, a former prosecutor, a former attorney general. And again, it had to do with Jeff Sessions, who was appearing before, I think, the Intelligence Committee she was on, and she was cross-examining him. I mean, I did that to witnesses. Sometimes, it wasn't particularly pleasant, but if you're trying to figure out what happened, you owe it to your constituents to drill down. And so Kamala was doing that. She was ordered by the chairman and another Republican member to stop. So I'm sitting there thinking, whoa, this is a lot bigger and deeper than even I thought. And I want you to ponder that. Because those two women were doing their jobs. And they were doing their jobs in a way that their male counterparts in the Senate do them every day. You get up and speak and you criticize somebody. You sit at a hearing and you ask tough questions. That's part of the job description. So in my chapter on being a woman in politics, I said, look, we have to call this behavior out. And we should be very clear that we still don't have enough women in politics, and we still don't have enough women in elected office, but it's about time that women were allowed to be themselves the way men are allowed to be themselves. And you know, years ago I was a trial lawyer, and I tried cases mostly in Arkansas. And I tried cases with a lot of men, on my side, on the other side, representing other parties. And they came in all sizes and shapes. There were tall men and short men and fat men and thin men and loud men and soft-speaking men. And they were all taken at face value. Like them, don't like them, but they had all these different modes of presentation, if you will. And I was telling the Eagleton students, I was trying a case in a place called Batesville, Arkansas, and we had a little break, and I walked back into the courtroom, and the front bench was filled with men in camouflage. And lots of, 3 or 4 or 5 day beard. So I said to the bailiff, who are they? And he said, well, they're hunters. They've been in the deer woods, and they came in for supplies, and they heard there was a lady lawyer, and they wanted to see her. Well, I felt that way sometimes during this campaign. Let's go see the lady running for president. Because, again, male candidates come in all sizes. And I've been on enough stages with enough men to know that, sometimes they get going and they yell. Right? Some of them even pound the podium. Some of them shake their finger. I never heard any of them called shrill. And, I'd get going, and I confess, I know I'm supposed to be very demure and very careful and not show a lot of emotion. And I'd get up there, and, I'd kind of get going. And then, oh, my God, did you see how shrill she was? I said, wait a minute, did you hear who was before me and who was after me?
One of my experiences in watching, one of the many experiences in watching all of this during the 2016 campaigns was watching one candidate consistently wag his finger, and I remember saying to a couple of people, male, if a woman did that, she would be in a lot of trouble. Wagging your finger at the audiences, and I didn't hear anyone really talking about it that much. It was really interesting. It was so obvious. It's in the DNA. I mean, we are still working all this out, and I understand that. I really do. I think that because we don't have enough women, think about, during the Republican primary, and Trump insulted everybody, but he insulted the only woman on the stage for how she looked. Remember? And so there are just these, these assumptions, these stereotypes that you play into, and that everybody has rolling around in their head. It's not like it's just a group of people. Everybody has it. And I confess to, sometimes not being as smart or sensitive as I needed to be or could have been, but you want to just sort of say what you want to say and present yourself as you want to present yourself, and yet you're constantly bearing that burden. I also mentioned, I read about this in the book, I was actually criticized for preparing for the debates, and I was criticized by members of the press, and I thought that was so odd because, I did have a little firsthand experience watching people running for president prepare for debates. My husband would go away for, a week, and we'd go decamp somewhere, and they'd drill him and yell at him, and he prepared endlessly. And,
President Obama, same thing. It's not a pleasant experience because you have your team telling you how terrible you are. But it's supposed to prepare you for actually being able to do it. So in that first debate, I guess picking up the cue from the press, somehow, I was being pictured, as the fourth grade girl who prepares and does her homework, right? And raises her hand and wants to do a good job and all of that. I mean, that's the way it was being sort of portrayed. And so, Trump said, yeah, I mean, you actually prepared for this debate. At first I thought, that's a new insult. And I said, yeah, and I'll tell you what else I prepared for. I prepared to be president. So. Crazy.
I think you have a few friends here. As someone who grew up in Vienna and barely escaped the Holocaust, my mother would say from time to time that it could happen here. And I would be very dismissive of that. I would dismiss it, and I'd dismiss her comments and her fears as implausible. I now find it shocking I'm even about to ask this question, but I do want you to talk about what are your concerns about the stability of our democratic institutions and structures in these tumultuous moments, and what for you is the essence of American democracy?
Well, I am fundamentally optimistic and hopeful. But I don't think that optimism and hope is warranted unless we do what we're supposed to do as citizens. So I worry about the degradation of institutions, the dismissing of norms and values. Because remember, a democracy is fundamentally held together by trust. You can disagree with somebody, but at the end of the day, you have a common interest in how we make decisions. You have an awareness of the importance of facts and evidence on which to base those decisions. You recognize the absolutely essential role of the press, and you protect that. And you believe in an inclusive economy and an inclusive society where the rights of minorities are protected as well. And so the pieces of how this democracy works are kind of clunky, and they don't always move smoothly. And we've made, Lord knows, our share of mistakes, and we've had to make up for it, and we've had to, try to keep moving toward that more perfect union. But at the end of the day, enough Americans have rallied to those fundamental beliefs. And that's why I'm optimistic, because I think enough Americans are doing and will do just that. I would like to get back to where Republicans and Democrats argue about all the policies that separate us and try to figure out the best path forward. But right now, I'm more worried about whether our Constitution is going to be honored, whether we will see the rule of law protected, whether we will have the predictability and stability that we need in foreign affairs. As a former Secretary of State, I am deeply worried about the loss of leadership and leverage that the United States is currently experiencing. You know, we have a group of real adversaries and competitors. Some are the same, some are different. But, you know, we do have an ongoing challenge from China. We have a very aggressive set of challenges from Russia. We have an ongoing worry, well placed, about Iran, about Islamic terrorism and extremism. So, you know, we have some real problems that we need to be addressing, and that requires us bringing our friends and allies together, not alienating them and walking away from them. And I am worried that our word is no longer trusted, and that the prospects for the kind of peace and prosperity and progress that we have spent decades building up since World War II are dimming. So there's a lot to be concerned about. And I understand that, you know, for enough Americans, it turned out that the prospect of the unpredictable reality TV campaign was just too good to turn off. But now we've seen it, and we've seen it now for more than a year. And I think many Americans are beginning to ask a lot of questions about what to expect and how this is going to turn out. So I'm hoping that the worst, the kind of question you asked me, Ruth, is just never even approached. We never get to that. But it will require people turning up and voting in these midterm elections. And it will require a lot of Republicans to take back their party and to put their country back into the equation for the Republican Party going forward. And it will not be easy. And I just want to say a word about what we are discovering about the way our elections were impacted by Russia and WikiLeaks and Cambridge Analytica and all of that. We're not anywhere near the bottom of understanding this. One thing we do know is, as has been testified to repeatedly, the Russians are still in our elections. They think they had a pretty easy first run, and they are going to be involved unless we come together as a country and unless we have leadership from our administration and our Congress and states to do much more to secure our elections than we've done up until now. And this whole question of cyber warfare, I don't know if you've read what's happening in Atlanta, but Atlanta has been shut down by a ransom warfare attack. So the Atlanta city government, one of the biggest cities in our country, has just been paralyzed because hackers have gotten into the city's computer system and has shut everything down, and they're demanding a great deal of money in order to open it back up. So you have criminal actors, hackers who are hacking for stealing credit cards and stealing personal information and demanding ransom. And some of those criminal hackers are connected with states. Some of you might remember there was a big hack of Yahoo a few years ago. 4 people ended up being indicted. 2 were criminal hackers, and 2 were Russian intelligence agents. And what the Russians will do is try to employ hackers so that they will then be able to say, well, we didn't do it. But of course, it's all part of the same plot. And I mention that because we need a national commission to look into what actually really did happen and what could happen in order to protect our elections. And every state should do everything it can to get to the bottom of what goes on in your own state. And I know that, you know, in Virginia, they ran some tests to show how easy their computers, their electric voting machines were to be hacked. They did away with it and went back to paper. Right. And at some point, I worry that we don't know what we don't know, my friends. We don't know. And when they say, well, you know, the Russians got into 21 states and their voter registration files, but nothing changed, I'm sitting there thinking, well, how do we know? Because no state wants to share the information because every state is a little embarrassed, and so they're trying on their own to figure it out. And the federal government could care less, it appears, because the current administration think it benefited them. But having negotiated with Vladimir Putin, he is not a reliable ally. So you don't know who he will go against next. So everybody should be worried about this.
I don't have time for all the questions I wanted to ask. I do want to kind of put one thing forward in the context of what you've been talking about. You know, I've been for years disturbed by it's a complicated subject, but essentially civic education and what people don't know. They don't know about the institutions. They don't know who their representatives are. They're lax about voting. We've had generations of students who've said, well, it's okay to be apathetic because what does that have to do with me, what the government does, you know? And I sometimes would throw out, well, if they instituted the draft again, you'd see. You'd vote. But we are seeing the march after the inauguration, and this march for our lives, the Parkland response. And it does look to me like a defining moment. It looks as if it's a national, ironically, your defeat and this horror in Parkland and other horrors that the Black Lives Matter movement is about, it looks as if it's a national civics lesson and that people are beginning to understand that what they do matters and voting matters and elections have consequences. But I don't mean to make a speech here, but what I want to say is the only way we'll really know this is we're putting an awful lot on the 2018 election.
Yeah,
right?
we are.
To see if people have learned the lesson, the basic lesson, civic education.
You know, Ruth, I really hope this is a turning point, and I hope it's a turning point for a lot of people, particularly young people, and that's what was so powerful about the students from Parkland and their willingness to speak up and speak out and go after the NRA and politicians who do their bidding. And I think that the consciousness has been certainly expanded about the connection between something that we can't abide, the murder of all of those students by someone who should have never gotten near a gun, and how we try to honor their loss as well as all the others who have been victims of gun violence, and that requires voting. And, you know, I think some people get a little bit wary. They say, well, it can't be that easy. Well, it's not easy because most people don't vote, and most people don't show up, and most people don't see it as the powerful tool that it is. And I'm hoping that in this election, this midterm election, enough people will, maybe for the first time or maybe for the first time in a long time, say, look, I was really moved by what happened at Parkland, or I'm sick we're the only country in the world not in the Paris Agreement on climate change, or I don't like what they tried to do to health care, or whatever the motivator is. Enough people will say, okay, I know what I'm going to do, and what I'm going to do is to go and vote. And it won't be easy, but I think it's doable, and that's what I'm hoping comes out of all of this amazing energy and emotion that we have been seeing over the last weeks and months. And that's why I said I'm fundamentally optimistic, because, you know, the American people end up, you know, doing the right thing. And sometimes it takes a little while longer than you wish, and we can get on crazy detours or get diverted. But at the end of the day, we don't want this incredible experiment in self-government and pluralism and dynamism and opportunity to founder. And we don't want to turn decision-making over large parts of our lives to unelected, you know, powerful interests. We want to be in a position where we are calling the shots in our towns and our counties and our states and our country.
So, I'm so happy you're here that I would love to go on, but I'm sure you have a few other things to do.
No, this is great.
So, but I'm going to bring this to a close by ending with something from what happened. You wrote this paragraph about and you'll, of course, immediately know what I'm talking about an event that you spoke at less than 10 days after the November election. It was at the request of your first boss, Marian Wright Edelman, founder of the Children's Defense Fund, and I would like to read a paragraph from the book describing that event. So there we were on November 16th, together again at the Children's Defense Fund. Marian stepped to the podium and talked about our long partnership and all we'd done together to lift up children and families. Then she pointed to her two granddaughters sitting in the audience and said, because of all the paths she's paved for them, one day soon, your daughter or my daughter or our granddaughters are going to sit in that Oval Office, and we can thank Hillary Rodham Clinton. That I will dispense with, but I just want to thank you for all these years of smarts and grit and determination and getting back up again and daring to compete and being an inspiration to all of us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. Hey, Jan, how are you? I'll come,
Hillary,
I can go this way.
Hillary, I think we're going out that side.
I was going to go down and say hello.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.